Beginning side 2 is a two-part track, Dodo/Lurker, with a sudden open of dramatic synth, guitars and drums. This is definitely the proggiest song of the album, and it's even a bit reminiscent of Brian Eno and some of the solo works of Peter Gabriel at the time. Yes, even when old PT has left the band, he's still somehow influencing them in some subtle capacity. But anyways, in this two-part track, we start with Phil singing about the dodos and how they're too big, they're ugly, they're unable to fly, so they have to die, be killed, be hunted down, and all that. Go the way of the dodo, of course. But then as the lyrics go on, Phil seems to sing about other things, such as how the sun gives warmth and life, how it's friend to mankind and trees, but not exactly a friend to the snowman since, well, snow melts in sunlight. And of a fish being caught in a hook and hoping he's considered too small and be thrown back into the sea, among other weird random stuff. Then about 5 minutes in, and in the last 2 minutes, we then seg into the second part of the song, Lurker, where Phil speaks and narrates in a very weird filtered voice about how Two Eyes spied on him and says a particular riddle, and it's all accompanied by a bit of small jumpy sith that sound very reminiscent to Morse code, although if it does actually translate to any actual Morse code, I'm not entirely sure what. But then when he actually sings the riddle itself, it kind of culminates in this dramatic, victorious, triumphant climax of music, complete with even a few subtle bells, I think. Almost like, I think like tubular bells or something, I don't know, but when he sings it, it just brings the climax almost on par with Supper's Ready, which is probably kind of fitting, which I'll get into in a moment. But the riddle itself he sings is, and I quote, "Clothes of brass, hair of brown, seldom need to breathe, don't need no wings to fly, a heart of stone, and a fear of fire and water, who am I?" Now, we could figure out this riddle for ourselves, but that was already answered by one of the tracks that was left off the album, a submarine, specifically a nuclear submarine. And yes, this was actually meant to be part of a multi-track piece, a suite if you will, not unlike say Duke, and of course much like Duke, it was kind of cut up into one piece, and the remaining two pieces, Submarine and Nami Nanu, were left off and end up being B-sides to other singles off the album. With that, some people have said that Nami Nanu is at the beginning of the suite, but according to official sources and the complete bootleg that has all the songs intact, with demos and everything, Nami Nanu is definitely the ending to the Dodo suite, with Submarine kind of in the middle between Lurker and Nami Nanu. And with all this considered, it kind of paints something of a story here, or rather a specific theme of extinction and nature and kind of the conflict between man and technology and all that. With this in mind, Nami Nanu kind of acts pretty well as both the intro and outro, like a bookend if you will, with its very tribal nature, and Phil constantly chanting the word Nami Nanu, which is probably just a nonsense word they just kind of made up. And when we get to Dodo, it kind of goes into the themes of extinction, the dodo being hunted down, the fishes being caught in nets, the snowmen being melted, and pimps being thrown into the sea by sirens and Davy Jones. Then with Lurker, that extinction theme kind of comes around into a sort of Cold War scenario, with bombs being launched and missiles being thrown and kind of explosion and kind of bringing about the end of life as we know it. then it brings us to the Submarine section, where it sounds very reminiscent of the ending of Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd, suspiciously enough. And it kind of paints a bleak and kind of sorrowful view of this kind of apocalyptic world where humans have kind of fought each other with nuclear power and just driven them to the point of extinction. It kind of seems to end on a dour note, were it not for Nami Nanu, which kind of paints a picture of nature growing back, old tribalism kind of reviving, and just kind of nature returning to take back the earth after man nearly destroyed it and eventually destroyed itself. It's a very good climactic piece, and honestly, I think it would have worked as a full-on suite in my opinion. As much as I love Dodo and Lurker on its own, I think it wouldn't have been entirely complete were it without Submarine and Nami Nanu. And this is probably one of my favourite Genesis suites, up there with Supper's Ready and the Duke Suite. After the epicness of Dodo and Lurker, we then cut to a rather interesting song. And by interesting, I mean controversial. It is simply titled Who Done It? This is considered by many Genesis fans to be one of, if not the worst Genesis song ever. And honestly, I can kinda understand why so. It's unlike any song they made before, and it's basically them spending 3-ish minutes just mucking about with their instruments. That said though, I think that was kind of part of the intent. Just basically improvising and seeing if they can make a song out of it, like most of the album as a whole. There's nothing too deep to analyze about this one. Phil just kind of came up with the lyrics on the spot in the basic whodunit scenario. Was it you? Was it me? A, he, she, A, B, X or Z? Though honestly, if I were to guess, it was probably A. You can never always trust him. That joke aside though, it is basically a kind of self-aware and a tongue-in-cheek song. Nothing to take too seriously. It's like I said, it's them messing around and trying to do a very fun, novelty kind of song. It's not meant to be grand or epic. It's not meant to be Supper's Ready or Lambs Lies Down. It's just meant to be a short, quick, and very, very humorous kind of track. If you're not into those kind of funny songs that take the mick out of rock genres as a whole, this probably may not be a thing. But if you don't mind a bit of a light-hearted song, one that with a bouncy beat, or ones that just kind of just go mad and just go out mad and insane and whatnot, you'd probably enjoy this one fine. Genesis fan or not, I think there's one that gets too much hate for its own good. Next, we have 2 individually penned songs. Unlike in Duke, where the 3 members all chipped in 2 songs each to accompany the group written suite, in Abacab they only offer 1 each. Aside from Tony Banks's Me and Sarah Jane, which we talked about first time, next we have Phil Collins' Man on the Corner. A very minimalist piece. Man on the Corner mostly consists of a drum machine, very few synths, and only halfway through does it actually have actual drums and percussion. Not unlike, say, Phil Collins' own solo single, In the Air Tonight. In it, Phil seems to sing about, or rather lament, about a lonely man sitting and standing around about in a corner, hence the title of the track. And in it, Phil seems to sing about how he seems to be waiting for something or someone, and even he admits he doesn't know what it is exactly. And in it, he kind of slightly goes into how this lonely man kind of reflects all of us in some way or another, how we often take things for granted, or maybe we don't know what it is that we want, but we still feel a need, a desire for it. with this, Phil seems to address the themes of poverty and homelessness, which he'd further elaborate on with the solo single he'd do in the other half of the 80s, Another Day in Paradise. All that said though, you can definitely tell this is a Phil Collins song. Not that it's a bad thing though, it's just that if you're someone who's listened to a lot of Phil Collins' stuff, be it his most famous stuff or more obscure stuff, it has some of the familiar ideas and musical tropes that often associate with Phil, such as the obvious drum machines, the very emotional, very waltzy lyrics, and even the gated reverb drums themselves. They are definitely sound like something out of In the Air Tonight, which is probably because they got Hugh Padgham to help out with the engineering of the song, if not most of the Abacab album. And honestly, it is an okay song. It's nothing too great, nothing too grand, but I can understand if not a lot of people may find this forgettable, but I still enjoy it regardless. Nothing too bad, nothing too harmful. It's mostly sweet, if not bittersweet. The last of the three individually credited songs is Mike Rutherford's Like It or Not. Sounding a bit like something out of Duke or Wind and Wuthering, the track deals with trying to fix a strained relationship, realizing and being reminded of why they dumped each other in the first place, and deciding to just give up on it, then being conflicted by whether to regret being alone or being with someone. It's possible that Mike was partially inspired by Phil's own divorce at the time. I can't confirm that for sure, but it's still possible. Regardless though, the song does go out on a triumphant note, like something like the songs Afterglow or Los Endos. Plus, with Phil singing so high and so proudly, and the guitars and synth kind of coming together in such a harmonious melody, and of course Phil, singing about how it's been a long time since he held or loved anyone. It may not be as good as, say, Your Own Special Way or Man of Our Times. But like it or not, is an underrated example of Mike Rutherford's own songwriting, be it as part of Genesis or in any solo work overall, even Mike and the Mechanics. And so Abacab ends with Another Record. It begins with a slow, euphoric section of electric piano and a filtered guitar, and it seems very soothing yet very almost suspenseful in a way. Then about 45 minutes in, barely a minute, before the hi-hat kicks in, and it then kind of turns into this chill, classy rocker of a tune, where Phil sings about and comments about an old rock and roller who's got nowhere to go, he's obsessed with past music, and he refuses to leave it all behind for once. So basically, certain old school Genesis purists. Well, anyway, Phil goes on to ask someone to help him out, and to put on another record. Across the song, we hear what sounds like a harmonica as well as even faint motor engine sounds, almost emphasizing the sort of western country kind of feel to it. And plus, it's also kind of clever how a song called Another Record is placed at the end of the album, especially since it in some way asks and orders the listener to, well, put another record on. It may not be intentional, it was probably coincidence, but I still think it's clever nonetheless. And on that note, this album is alright. It's okay, at least by Genesis standards and 80s albums as a whole. It may not be as grand and deep and thought-provoking as, say, Lambs Lies Down or Selling England by the Pound, but as a Genesis album where they were intentionally trying to do something different from their past albums, I think it still holds up on its own. Though I still find it interesting how, for all their intents to make it as far distant from past albums as possible, even to the point of taking out songs that they thought sounded too similar to past works. A good chunk of the songs here do kind of remind me a bit of some of their past work, almost as if they can't exactly get away from it permanently for good. But still, regardless, it's still a fine pop rock album, and it may not be the best Jonas album to some, but I still think it still isn't much worth all the hate. Plus, a good chunk of the themes here seem to deal with loneliness and isolation, with songs such as No Reply at All, Me and Sarah Jane, Like It or Not, and Man on the Corner. It may that may not it may not been it may have been a coincidence, but I still think it's interesting how a couple of separately written songs were still kind of dealing with a similar theme in one way or another. If I were to pick a favourite song from I would go with Dodo and Lurker, or maybe Keep It Dark. Overall, it almost kind of feels like half an album, especially keeping in mind how they took out certain songs from it. Not just Submarine and Nami Nanu, which would have formed the Dodo Suite, but also 3 other songs that were eventually used in the 3x3 EP, which was released soon after this album. So, overall, Genesis' Abacab is worth giving another chance after 40-something years, and I still have to admire their intent to try to do something a little different, but still managing to maintain some idea of prog rock and the upcoming pop scene of the 80s. Next time, though, we take a look at a band that was themselves said to be inspired by Genesis, an album by Marillion, though probably not one you might expect. Next week, we're looking at something a bit more fearsome. Hey. Back. Just to say, here I am in the middle of somewhere again. Turns out I've been transported to Gloucester, of all places. There was some weird frat party going on, and I've been waiting a whole day for my friends to get that ground bridge working again. And I'm still waiting around here. Don't know what that was that happened last night. Hopefully there weren't any monsters or Slendermen out to get me. But I'm still holding out. I'm still surviving, thankfully, and still waiting. I've been trying to contact my friends, but we haven't got much reception, and been walking around here. Had some kind of stag party last night I was a part of. I don't know how I get myself into these things, but needless to say, we better get that ground bridge up and running again, and hopefully these messages will get up out there as soon as possible. Hello? Hello? Damn, still no reception. You think with better tech, we'd get better reception out here. even out here, you'd think they get better reception with all our improved tech.